Hola con todos, bienvenidos a un nuevo episodio de Ritmo Verde. Hoy tenemos a Vikram Sami. Vikram es director de Rendimiento de Edificaciones de Olson Kundig y aporta más de 20 años de experiencia integrando conocimientos técnicos con diseño. Desde que se unió a la firma ha inspirado una mayor curiosidad sobre cómo los edificios pueden favorecer el bienestar de sus ocupantes mediante una conexión fuerte con la naturaleza. Welcome, Vikram.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm looking
So
forward
you're
to
going to
it.
be speaking this weekend, and we appreciate that you take the time to do an interview for Ritmo Verde.
Oh, my pleasure, of course.
So I'm going to start asking you about passive design.
Something very close to my heart. Yeah?
Exactly. So how would you define passive design in simple terms? What would be the core idea behind it?
So in architecture, passive design is this idea of actually delivering thermal comfort and shelter by working with your climate. So you might use maybe shading to block the sun when you want it, but then let in, the sun in the wintertime when you want more heat, and store it using materials like concrete and bricks, thermal mass. And it's this idea of natural ventilation, daylight, basically working with your climate to deliver, I think, a more healthy built environment.
And why do you think passive design is so important today? I mean, given our climate concerns and energy cost.
It's interesting because the primary concern in the 1950s and 60s in the US, people turned to passive design, especially passive solar, because that's when we had an energy crisis. Or in my opinion, we've always had an energy crisis. Mm-hmm. We've just come to realize it many times, right? They used it to save energy, ostensibly. And nowadays, with our air conditioning systems, HVAC systems are actually a lot more efficient than they used to be. And our renewable energy systems are actually getting cheaper and cheaper. So there's still an energy benefit, but it's not that big. For me, the real benefit of passive design is it's healthier. It connects you to your environment. So we've actually developed this climate apathy where we don't feel enough about our climate because we're not connected to it. And so I think passive design will help us get to that point better. And then we also use passive design. It's gained popularity recently with this idea of passive survivability. Mm-hmm. So the idea of when the power goes out, can you still live in your buildings? Because we had a situation in 2005, I think it was, when Hurricane Katrina hit, where a lot of buildings lost power and were not survivable. And so it became a humanitarian crisis. And if we can design our buildings to not do that, that's important. To me, it's equally important to think about, well, what if instead of going AC first and then use passive design as a backup option, what if we design passive first and then used AC as the backup option? I'm not arguing against it. It's necessary. As our climate warms up, it's more and more necessary. But what if we thought about passive first and then use those systems?
And you mentioned passive survivability and that certain buildings are not or will not be able to hold human occupation. What's the threshold, or what do you envision? Because it's difficult for us in Ecuador with temperate and moderate climate to imagine what a situation would be where buildings are not able to be occupied.
So you guys are blessed with, I think, especially in Quito, with a very mild year-round climate. But even in Quito, you can have a situation like that where if you've designed a building with no operable windows, right, airtight, and it's relying on an air conditioning system to deliver ventilation but also thermal comfort, you can hit a point where if you turn the power off, suddenly you have no more fresh air in the building. And beyond a certain point, you get what we call sick building syndrome, where you actually can't occupy the building. So if you could open a window, it's actually very easy, right? The second thing is buildings trap heat, especially glass buildings. So even in a mild climate, you can actually get to a point where it's overheating. By default, buildings are warmer than the outside. And so having a system where, especially in summertime, you can cool your building off is really important. And then in the wintertime, if you can insulate it enough to actually store heat, that's also important.
It's funny that you mentioned how we use passive design strategies during energy crisis. But then if you think about cultures, historically, we always used to rely on passive design.
Oh, absolutely.
And systems came to modify that. And it seems to me, talking to you now, if you think about our journey through sustainability and how it has pushed a lot of systems, either through, mechanical ventilation, air conditioning, lighting, etc., to target energy efficiency. But then I think we are at that tipping point where probably that is given more weight than any other alternative.
Yeah.
And so what would be your take on how systems like, LEED, BREEAM, or other systems have to balance that? Because I think there's a lot of push for technologies instead of...
It is, and we tend to, we tend to embrace technologies easier because it's more convenient. But it's also kicking the can down the road a little bit, right? It's like someone else's problem at that point. The AC manufacturers can develop more and more efficient things. But I think when we design buildings, there's an opportunity to actually make the buildings work first, right? To actually make your buildings work hard. And to me, passive design is this idea. So if you imagine two cars, right? There's, a Prius that's very efficient and gets great miles per gallon. And you're driving at 50 miles each way, right? And then the second car is maybe a pickup truck that has terrible mileage, but you don't drive it. Which one actually, the Prius is more efficient, but the pickup truck actually uses less energy. And that's because it's not driving. So what if we could get our buildings to drive less? And passive design is that equivalent where you turn things off and you just use what's free. So to me, that's the analogy.
Yeah, you could have the perfect combination of having a Prius and not driving it and using public transportation.
that would be yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you would reduce energy use in all of your systems.
The analogy goes only so far, yeah.
You talk about passive design, of course, and knowing how to not control, but how to work with natural elements. Mm-hmm. And I know that you're really passionate about sun and solar angles. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about all your exploration through how the building envelope with the correct analysis of the sun can help you achieve that.
Yeah, so to me, it's funny because I got into sustainability through actually studying sun path diagrams and things like that, and understanding that, hey, you can actually predict how the sun will hit your building and design with that, right? So to me, you're actually designing for the sun and designing with, passive solar and things like that. It starts off with orientation, which is can you actually set your building on the right path? And typically, most places in the world, you have low sun angles on the east and west and higher sun angles on the north and south. And especially in Quito, you've got equal sun angles on the north and south because you're along the equator. But even in, Seattle, where I'm from, your angles on the south are still higher than on the east and west. Now, what's interesting is on that northern hemisphere, that southern facade becomes this real workhorse, right? Because the sun is high in the summertime and then gets low in the wintertime, right? And so you can actually design your windows to shade itself in the summertime and then let in the winter sun. And people have known how to do this for centuries, right? We've just forgotten. And the beauty of that is there's only one moving part, and that's the earth, right? The rest of it is all just static. And to me, that's the way to do it. And then you've got to figure out how to store that heat. So that's where the materiality comes into it. But it's not rocket science. It's pretty easy.
It's understanding your surroundings and connecting to the natural environment.
And I mean, if I can do it, anyone can. Really. It's like...
Well, I think the fact that you are probably studying how to connect with the environment, what other factors do you consider can influence building performance apart from working with the climate and the envelope? Yeah,
so there's, the way I like to think of it, it's the 3 Ps, right? So there's people, place, and program. So place is what the climate brings to you, all of those factors. Then there's people. It's like, what are you doing inside how do the people run their building? Do you choose to open a window or not? How in tune to the building performance are you? And then the last thing is program. What are you putting in the building? So a house has a different thermal profile than an office building or a data center, for example, right? So all of those actually have different metabolic rates for the building, so to speak, where some buildings actually produce more heat inside them than others. And so that changes when you want to actually cool it and when you want to heat it. And it's a term I call, well, not I didn't invent the term, balance point temperature. And it's something that I love to work with so the balance point temperature is the temperature at which you want the outside to be at to maintain thermal comfort on the inside. And so if you can find what that is and it matches what the outside is, then you're in perfect thermal balance. Generally what happens is it's hotter outside in the summer than the balance point. So you want it to be colder than it actually is. And it's colder outside than the balance point in the winter. So that's our challenge, is how do you lower that balance point in the winter and how do you raise it in the summer?
And I think one of the points that you make here is that we have to rely more on how people operate a building, like rely more on the human capacity to adapt than on technology and systems. And I think that's one of the things that's fairly difficult to apply on our current world, in the architecture and construction business. It's easier to rely on systems than to think that people might have the ability to interact and adapt. So what would be, given your experience in Olson Kundig, how do you work with that? Do you work with clients to not educate, but at least, give them knowledge and so that they know how to interact with their surroundings? Yeah,
so that's a good question. So a lot of our clients are residential clients. And so we try to design our systems to be as intuitive as possible. We also design our buildings to be very passive. We do a lot of operable windows. In fact, we do what we call gizmos, where the kinetic pieces where an entire wall will move away. And now there's no barrier between inside and outside, right? So those are like passive on steroids, right? But to me, the simpler you can make the systems, the better. But ultimately, the best judge of how hot or cold you are isn't a thermostat, it's you. So if you can actually make it easier to control and put it in the hands of the people, that's better. Now, I'm not against technology. There's some really cool technologies out there, right? There's back about 10 years ago, there's a product called Comfy, which was a building operation system that used smartphones and apps where people could vote if you're too hot, too cold, or comfy. And it would use machine learning to adjust the thermostat based on people's responses, right? So I think the market is ripe, or the industry is ripe for innovations like that, especially with the advent of AI. Yeah, I think that's a good application for AI to actually learn how people use buildings and adapt. But I think we've got a ways to go. But ultimately, it's got to be about, high performance building for high performance people, really. It's got to be about the people at the end of all of this. Because ultimately, what are we building it for? It's for humans.
Yeah, of course. And it's, like you mentioned, if you're working on residential projects, you've got the users are probably a family and they interact in the space in a different way. I guess the greatest challenges for passive design are on large scale buildings and office spaces and other areas where users don't even have the possibility to adjust or control their comfort. But also Kundik has also worked on several buildings, in different typologies. It would be interesting to know how you address those buildings. How do you integrate the user for that?
It's a
passive and comfort experience.
It's a good question. So, we actually just completed an office building in Atlanta that it's a spec office building. So, I would have liked it to have operable windows. It doesn't, but we have outdoor spaces that kind of like porches that we've created where people can actually choose to work outdoors, and then we use building shading. It's got this beautiful louver system on the outside that blocks the sun when you don't want it and controls that light. So a lot of that was about this idea of democracy in the floor plate. So basically a democratic floor plate, where the problem with office floors normally are you have a lot of glass and you have people next to the windows are too hot, and people on the inside are too cold because the AC system is trying to keep up with that, right?
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is the shades go down, but there's still this, so you lose daylight, you lose views, and people are still uncomfortable. So what we did there was we actually controlled the sun at the facade and said, okay, if we can control that, now we don't have overheating at the facade, but we also have uniform daylight. And our HVAC system doesn't have to overcool the space. So now it becomes this kind of more nuanced balance. And, wherever you sit in that floor plate, you're comfortable. So that's, I think, one way to do it. We're also working on a large football practice facility for a university, which is completely naturally ventilated. And I'm not sure, it might be one of the first naturally ventilated football practice facility. And so it's this idea of, we can actually work with our environment if we choose to. And in that one, we actually worked with the team and the coach and all of that to understand thermal comfort conditions at which they can practice at
their different metabolic rates and activities.
Exactly. So it was a pretty cool exercise.
Wow. I mean, for us, we're here in Ecuador, and even in the hot cities like Guayaquil or other cities on the coast, we do have a mild weather, a big part of the year. So it's difficult to relate to passive design and natural ventilation being applied on climates that have 4 seasons. When you have to consider winter and summer, I think that brings a lot of other challenges that you also have to address. That must be interesting and an added layer to the complexity.
Absolutely. And look, again, just want to reiterate, I'm not arguing for doing away with active
Yeah,
systems.
yeah.
So, but so there's times when you're gonna want to run your AC, right? In the summer, if there's wildfire smoke, or if you have 110-degree day, of course you're gonna want to run AC. But there's other times when it's actually beautiful outside, and that's actually more often than not. And so I think we should be designing our buildings for that time first. And then we can the AC is going to work regardless, but we should be designing them to actually connect to the environment first, and then use those systems as the backup option.
Yes, that should be the way all architecture is designed and built.
Yeah, exactly.
And that brings me to another point of a concept that I know it's also dear to your heart. That's comfort. Was it thermal delight? I think you called it. Like achieving that. It's like that experience of bliss and comfort. But to get to that, you also mentioned that people need to experience a little bit of discomfort to actually enjoy that.
Yeah, so thermal delight is this idea of actually feeling joy from your thermal environment, right? And so think about, like, for instance, if you're in a cold climate, going into a sauna, right, and then jumping into a pool of ice water. All of those have these pleasurable moments. Or camping around if you're camping, sitting around a campfire, there's a certain joy and pleasure with that. Now, the capacity for thermal delight is predicated on an initial thermal discomfort. You need to be uncomfortable to actually feel thermal delight. If you encountered thermal comfort 24/7, so if you are at your optimal 24/7, you wouldn't actually feel thermal delight. You just feel thermal boredom, probably. Right?
Exactly. You would lead a pretty boring life.
Yeah. And so to me, passive buildings actually have that moment where you can sit on a porch with a tree outside and this cool breeze washes over you. And it's delightful. There's joy in it. And I think buildings need to have more of that. We used to have, if you go to a lot of the older buildings, they had that. Porches, courtyards, things that, and the other aspect of this is it actually connects to multi-sensory experiences. We tend to lead with only the visual because it gives us the most information, right? But all of our other senses actually play into our sense of happiness, well-being, memory, emotion. All of those are actually tied to the more intimate senses like smell and taste and sound. You probably have a song from your childhood that brings back memories, right? That's that sense actually triggering, emotion from way back. And passive systems have that ability. All we hear from active systems is white noise, right? The air conditioning. When that goes away, it opens up to other stuff, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that should be, or is actually the core of sustainable design, trying to get to that balance where people actually enjoy and can live in constructed spaces or built spaces that connect to the surroundings and can enjoy, like a complete range of activities on life, going from indoor to outdoor without having that sense of, like going into boxes that are specifically conditioned and without that connection.
And for me, it all goes back to joy, right? It's like what we're talking about isn't, it's important to save energy and all that, but ultimately passive buildings are inherently more joyful. They have more soul to them, I think. And I think that's what's important. It's to be able to, we have this skylight in our office building that's operated on city water pressure. Mm-hmm. It's a phenomenal feat of engineering. Phil Turner is the guy who designed it. He's a genius. And it literally runs on city water pressure, right? And when that thing opens, it is such a joyful moment because the AC cuts off, but then you get this cool breeze coming through over you. You hear different sounds from outside the building. It's pretty remarkable. And to me, that's what it's about. It's about finding those moments of joy and making people appreciate the built environment because of it. I think that's key.
Yeah. Architecture connecting people and place. I think that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Vikram, for this talk. It was amazing to have you here. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about you and the projects at Olson Kundig. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias por escucharnos. Les esperamos en un siguiente episodio de Ritmo Verde.